All right, we are at 8 o'clock, so let's get started. Hello, everybody who is joining us. I am Gwendolyn Kiste, and I am the moderator of this amazing group tonight. I am so excited to be talking to all of you. So let's get started, and I'll just go around as I see each of you and just introduce yourself, say a little bit about you, however much you want to say. I don't want it to be one of those things that anybody feels pressured. It could just be like, hi, and that could be enough. That's totally up to you. So let's start with you, Jessica. You're the first that I see.
Hi. Hi, my name is Jessica Guest. I'm the author of Cirque Berserk. I love horror. I have a website that I haven't updated in a very long time called Black Girl's Guide to Horror. And yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Zoje.
Hi, I'm Zoje Stage. I'm the author of Baby Teeth and Wonderland and the forthcoming Getaway.
Awesome. Nicole.
Hi, I'm Nicole Willson. My debut horror novel, Tide Pool, is coming out in August, and I've also written a good bit of short fiction and flash. And if you'd like to read more about my stuff, my website is www.nicolewillson.com, and hope to see you there. Really glad to be here. Thank you.
Sraa.
Hi, I'm Sraa Tantlinger. My two latest releases are Cradleland of Parasites, which is poetry inspired by the Black Plague and was started before the pandemic, just in case anyone's curious, and Not All Monsters, which is an anthology of women in horror.
And Christa, who's in that anthology. So
yes, I'm Christa Carmen. I'm the author of the short fiction collection Something Borrowed, Something Blood-Soaked, and I have numerous pieces of short fiction in various anthologies, one being Not All Monsters, with Sraa as the wonderful editor.
Awesome. And Carina.
Oh, me. Hi, I'm Carina Bissett. Good to see you all. I write poetry and short fiction. I was really fun this year. I got to work with Gwendolyn on the HWA Poetry Showcase. And in a week, on the 19th, Twisted Anatomy is coming out. And so I get to share a TOC with Sraa. So I'm pretty excited about that too. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's jump right in. So this is Women in Horror Month. That is why we are here celebrating. And so when did each of you start writing horror? What got you into writing horror? So let's go around again. Let's start with Jessica again.
I started writing horrors when I was probably in middle school, like 6th grade or something. I wrote this story called Laurie's Back, which now looking at it is kind of like a Carrie ripoff, but it was about this girl who like got bullied, and then like they killed her accidentally, and then she came back from the dead because she was a witch. They didn't know she was a witch, and she started wreaking havoc because like she put on like some badass like cool girl like glamour on herself. But anyway, that's when I started writing horror and reading horror too, like since before that, and it's just been a long ride since then.
Very cool. I love that. And like, even if it's a Carrie ripoff, you added some cool elements there. I would totally read that story. So I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, I should look. It's around here somewhere in a composition book. I should probably try and revise that and turn it into something.
I love it. Zoje.
Yeah, so I was thinking about that the other day. When did I start writing horror? And I remembered I had this thing happened so long ago, I'd almost forgotten, but in 1990, yes, that long ago, I actually signed with an agent for a screenplay I'd written. And it was this big horror action screenplay about this office building near Boston that was haunted by the ghost of a woman killed during the Salem witch trials. Oh. And that had been like, I was trying to break into Hollywood. And yeah, so actually I've been writing horror for a lot longer than I had realized.
I love that. That's a great story. Nicole, how about you?
I started writing horror also around middle school age. I had read The Cask of Amontillado in class and also The Lottery, and those two stories just rocked me to my core because it made me understand how powerful this genre could be. So I wrote a lot of stuff. I don't remember specifics. It was mostly ghost stories, sort of Poe knockoffs and everything, but I really enjoyed it. And then I had some teachers and professors kind of steer me away from that and say, oh, you should write serious fiction instead of horror. But I got over that. The early 2000s, I returned to horror and I've never left. So
Good. That's the way it should be.
yes.
We're serious here. Like I said, when we got started, we were all very serious. Come on. So, Sraa, how about you?
Mine was middle school too. I was really obsessed with R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike, and Rob Zombie in middle school. So somewhere between that trio, I really liked lyrics, but I couldn't sing. So I think I turned my want to write lyrics into poetry, which makes a lot of sense. Lyrics and poetry go hand in hand. So again, yep, they were very angsty, probably a little gory. Never looked back.
I love that. That's great. These are great stories. I always love this because it was like before we started, like it's like, oh, should we ask this question? Like, I love asking this question because I feel like everybody comes up with a different answer. And so it's so varied. And yet, like we said, so many of us have like this very long history with it. So I love that. Christa, how about you?
I actually didn't start writing horror until about 7 years ago. I had always I wrote a lot of like bad starts to psychological thriller novels and never finished them because they were terrible. And then, yeah, it's so cliche to the point where I don't even like to admit it, but I was reading Stephen King's On Writing and like got to the end of the book and was like, wait a minute, why? I love writing and I've always loved horror. Like Sraa said, I was obsessed with R.L. Stine and, you know, read tons of Stephen King and tons of, you know, like anything that you could turn into horror, like the Babysitter's Club mystery series, anything that was like a little spookier. So I was like, why have I never tried to write horror? And then I just sat down and Nicole, like you said, with the lottery, it was kind of like the convergence of Stephen King's On Writing. And then I had recently read The Lottery and I was like, I'm going to try to write a piece of short horror fiction and see what happens.
Did you ever try to get that one published or no? The first one.
Yeah. I think it was published on a podcast that has since gone defunct, which is probably best for everyone.
That's great. All right, Carina.
Hi, I guess I'm pretty new to it. Although it appears I was always writing horror. I'm a fairy tale person, so I've been writing them forever. And it wasn't until about 2016 when I won the HWA scholarship that I realized that maybe it wasn't dark fantasy like I had been told it was, that it was actually more like horror. I thought, wait, you mean cutting people up is horror? So I do a lot of body horror. I write a lot about bodies and scarring and women and silence. That's where I end up going. So it wasn't in my MFA program. They asked, what do you do? And I finally just stood up. I said, I guess I'm writing a horror. So I stepped away from the safety of dark fantasy into the dark realm. Here I am.
Well, you and I were on a panel through HWA a couple years ago now, and it was a fairy tale panel because it's like fairy tales are scary. They're really scary. Like we're all introduced to them very early, but they're terrifying and really violent. So I feel like, you know, that absolutely is horror, even though we weren't told that when we were young. So, all right. So the next thing, do you feel the female perspective on horror is different than the male perspective on horror? So let me go in a different order. Let me start with you, Sraa.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think women are just so intimate with fear and horror. It's something that we've probably experienced since the dawn of time and has continued. And I think our perspective probably comes a lot from societal expectations of the kind of woman that you should be. So sometimes you can kind of take that to your horror writing and twist that or change it to how you want it to be. And I think for me personally, just that ability to have power and control over what you're writing, I think is probably a big draw for women, especially in horror. Society speaking, men usually have the power and aren't battling with themselves, you know, if they seem too confident or not confident enough. And that's something that women kind of always question ourselves. Like if we come across as too confident, do we get called a bitch? If we come across as too humble, then are we too meek and don't have that power? So I think for me personally, horror fiction allows me to have power and control as a woman over my stories, over the trauma and grief that I choose to share or put into my fiction in any way.
Very good. Very good. Nicole, how about you?
I agree with that. And also I feel there's a certain vulnerability of perspective there because, you know, you're taught from a fairly young age, don't get in cars with strange men, don't wear this, don't drink that, don't let people hand you a drink. And you just feel like you're very sort of vulnerable and under constant threat. And that's even before you start adding supernatural elements into things. So yeah, I think that's a very strong perspective, just feeling, especially I always see aspects of that in a lot of female written horror. It's like we're aware there's threats all around us even before you bring in monsters, basically. So yes, I absolutely believe there is a different perspective.
Yeah. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Like, I kind of said this too with the roundtable questions that you had, but it was like there's this built-in vulnerability, like Nicole said, and it's like you step outside and there's threats all around, right? Like there's this movie I just watched on Hulu, Alone, where it's this woman, she's driving across country by herself, right? And it's like that shouldn't be something that can turn into a horror story for anyone, right? But as a woman, you need to think about, where am I going to sleep? Personally, me, I'd be like, I'm not going to be on the road after a certain time. I'm not going to I have to be constantly aware of my surroundings. I have to see, oh, is that person following me or not? Should I pull in here? Should I have, so there's certain things that you are more aware of just because you're a woman and just because you know that there are things that there are monsters out there that are not just monsters. People are monsters. It could be anyone that could, drive you away for whatever reason. So I think we have that kind of perspective that we add to the genre because we do have a power, but there's this, it's almost like the world wants you to be a victim all the time. So it's like you're kind of fighting against that, but also you have that perspective because you can write about it,
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that everybody has said. And, it's a little bit of a cliche, but I really think it's true that women are in touch with their emotional side in a different way than men are. And I feel like we can bring something that's a little bit deeper, maybe a little bit more authentic to how we write our characters, especially our women characters, especially compared to how men write women characters. So I think there's something about what women can naturally tap into because we're used to discussing very emotional things with friends. It's not something that we're told, oh, don't cry, don't have feelings. Like women can have all of that. And I think it can add a lot of depth and a lot of sensitivity and a lot of vulnerability to stories. And I think when you tap into those very fragile things, I think people can really relate to them. So I think that's really something amazing that women bring to horror writing and writing in general.
Yeah.
Very good. Very true. Very true. Carina.
Hi. So I get nervous about generalizations. I'm going to put that up front. But I've thought about this a lot. I try to read stories without looking to see the gender of the writer because it doesn't really tell you all that much. But I do find myself drawn more to women's work in general than I am to men's work. And I think a lot of it is because I can relate to the interior struggle. It seems to me that men, and this is generalization, but men have, when they're feeling things, a lot of it's external. They put it out in the world with external. They like to fight their battles and win, see it, touch it. And I think in general, women tend to internalize those battles. And so it becomes, I think women often become their own enemy in that particular way. So to me, it's more the difference between the quiet and the internal and the external and the way that we go about dealing with conflict. That's what I think. Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And Christa.
So I have to say first, Jessica, I have not seen Alone, but when you were talking, you said it's about a woman driving across the country and it's a horror story. And I thought to myself, if it was a man driving across the country, it would be a comedy. So I thought, like, there's a difference right there.
Wow. Yeah.
And then the thing I always think of when, like, I'm thinking about the difference between male horror writers and female horror writers, I always think back to that quote. We've probably all heard it. Margaret Atwood, men's big fears that women will laugh at them, women's greatest fears that men will kill them. And I mean, just touching on what everyone said already, there's just the simple fact that women are, more physically vulnerable. And so we can go into a lot of different scenarios with just that different perspective. And then to mix it up a little bit, to not keep just repeating what everyone has said, I also think in terms of body horror, like we start to experience, between menstruation and potential pregnancy and menopause, like just the possible places to go as a woman when exploring body horror. I mean, there's like no end to the possibilities that you can pull from any number of those or other things that we go through.
Yeah. All right. So, and also I'm just going to say, because I keep trying to go in a different order so nobody gets put on the spot. If I skip somebody, seriously wave at me and be like, Gwendolyn, you skipped somebody. Just make sure, because I do not want it to look like I'm being passive aggressive, like you don't get this question. Okay. So we're talking women in horror. Name one or two current living female authors, because we always say, people always are like, oh, female authors, and they'll go with Mary Shelley or Shirley Jackson. And we're like, that's great. We all love them, but we want to focus on the women who are still out there writing today. So one or two living female horror writers out there today you'd recommend and why you'd recommend them. So Zoje.
I'm going to go with a book. I brought it. I can't speak to the breadth of this author's work because this is the only one that I've read. But the thing that I was struck by with this book and why I feel it's relevant to this discussion is there's so many different ways for horror to exist. And this isn't a book where you're sitting there on the edge of your seat and you're terrified. The thing that's terrifying about it is the concept. And it's the concept of basically societally structured cannibalism. And especially living in this world that we live in right now, where it seems like, oh my God, the world would never get to that place. The government would never do that. When you think about how radical people who call themselves conservative, I'm sorry to go there, but we live in a very radicalized time. And so it's like, yes, this is a stretch from right now. But as with many other things that have really set a tone for the future, like when 1984 was written, it's like, okay, maybe it's not that far off. So I like those kind of just horrifying concepts that reflect something about the world we're living in right now.
Yeah. You know, when I first heard the concept of that book like 6 months or a year ago, I thought how 5 years ago I would have been like, there's no way we could get to that point. And now I'm like, I don't know what we could get to. Like, I don't know the depths that we could get to. So like, I'm like you said, like those kind of those situations and those concepts are so scary because it's like you realize we're capable of really terrible things, not just as individuals, because so much of horror is about individuals, serial killers or monsters, but what we can get to at a societal level. I'm gonna go to Sraa next because I know she loves that book. So
that was like the book I told everybody last year, read this book. Yeah, it just does things with horror that you really have to be brave to do. I think she really puts herself out there with that one. So yeah, definitely recommend reading Tenders the Flesh too. I'm gonna say Linda Addison for me. Linda was one of the first people that I met when I went to World Horror Con, which was my first convention in 2016. And I think it was the first time that I read poetry out loud other than doing it in grad school with my peers. And Linda was so supportive. She told me to submit a poem to her right after we read it. And ever since then, I've just been, love listening to her read. When you hear Linda Addison read her poetry, it's an experience. Like no one reads their work like Linda does. So she's just constantly inspiring to me. She's an amazing editor. She does so much other than just poetry too. But she's someone that I've just continually looked up to in the genre. She gives back to the HWA. So she's just an incredible person, an incredible writer, and someone that has continually inspired me and just kind of helped me come to terms with the different ways that you can write horror poetry as well.
It's great because it's so many people are saying in the comments like, yay, Linda, Linda's the best. 'Cause she is. She's so fantastic. She is such a fantastic person. So that's great. All right, Jessica.
I'm gonna go with Zen E. Rockland. She has a story called, I believe it's called Night Sun, that's out with Tor. It's like a really, it's like like a long short story kind of. But the thing that I admire about her is that she writes about race and like being a Black woman from this. It's from a perspective that I don't think I've seen that much, where it's like instead of trying to make her characters always these strong, you know, people who know what to do all the time, they're kind of like very vulnerable, and they make decisions that like you kind of question, but you see why they do this, because it's like they're coming from a place of such hurt and like vulnerability. And yeah, it's I think she's great. I think she's awesome. The Night Sun, there it is. Yeah. And she has other short stories that are just mind blowing too. So yeah, I'll say her.
Yeah. Great one. Carina.
I had to unmute myself. It was picking up. I love Linda Addison too. She's got a reading for the Bloody Valentine on Fridays or on Sunday. So she's great. But for me, the one person who's really made a big difference in the way I read and the way I write is Angela Slatter. She's in Australia. She's just marvelous in so many ways. She's a marvelous person and a marvelous writer. And she is definitely, I think, from the line of Angela Carter. So she delves into fairy tale quite often. She has a new novel coming out, All the Murmuring Bones. It's gotten a starred review. I know at least one. It's coming out in March. So I read everything she does. I like the way she intertwines her stories. They build on each other. They're interlocked. And if you haven't read her work, I would highly recommend it. It's really, we're starting to see more of it in the United States, which is really a wonderful, wonderful thing. Yeah, she's wonderful.
Yeah, she's great. She's absolutely great. Nicole.
The one person I really thought of this question is Alma Katsu, and I know she's speaking in the part 2 of this panel, so I'm looking forward to that. But I absolutely love her historical horror. I love the way that she takes these familiar stories that are already kind of horrific in themselves, like the Donner Party and the sinking of the Britannic, and then just puts these incredibly interesting spins on them with really compelling characters, with this whole way of like, how could this have happened? And the conflicts that they face between the characters and the situation that they're in, and absolutely beautiful prose, I think. I love her work. You know, she has a new book coming out soon. I can't wait. And again, she's speaking in part 2 of this panel in a couple of weeks. I'll be looking forward to that too. So she's one of my favorites. So really enjoy her work.
Very good, very good. And that's a great plug. 2 weeks from today, there's part 2 of this panel with all new panelists and the amazing Becky Stratford as moderator. So yeah, so if you're enjoying this, or if you're not, and you're like, maybe some other people will do this better, then come back in 2 weeks. All right, Christa.
I'm going to say Jessica McHugh and Christina Singh. They're both such bold, risk-taking writers that as soon as I started getting into reading indie horror, I found both of their work, and I just have been such a fangirl ever since. Like everything they put out, I have to read. Jessica does so much. She writes YA, and her Blackout poetry collection's amazing, and it just seems to me like when she sits down to write something, she never has that, well, this is too wild, or this is too crazy, or this is too like not been done. She just seems to do whatever she wants, and I love that about her work. And Christina, her nonfiction, her poetry, they both just seem to do exactly what they want, and it comes across so wonderfully. Christina's last poetry collection, it tackled fairy tales and monsters, and like there were so many different parts to it, but she blended it together so perfectly in a way that I don't think many people could have done. So I'm a big fan of both of their work.
Yeah, there was a lot of great poetry last year in particular. Like I felt like because of the pandemic, I was having trouble reading longer things, but I'm like, I can read poetry. I can handle that. So like I have a lot of poetry like collections, and they both had great ones last year. So from female authors to female characters. So who are some female characters in horror that have really inspired you, either just you yourself or your work? So let's start with you, Jessica.
Oh, oh God. I mean, I'm always inspired by a final girl. You know, I'm like, so I like when you said that, in my head, Laurie Strode, is that
Yep.
Yeah, from Halloween, she flashed. So Jamie Lee Curtis, that picture of her like looking over the couch, that's what like flashed in my head. And then Sydney Prescott, and then Nancy from Nightmare on Elm Street. So I don't know, there's a lot of characters. I just like when women, like, what I like about the end of a slasher movie is when the girl finally fights back. And I always draw a lot of strength from that when I see her like go from being maybe meek or timid or whatever, or doubting herself, to like finally standing and fighting. So I guess that's part of why I like slasher so much. But yeah, I always find that it gives me strength, I suppose. Yeah.
I love that. That's like so beautiful. That's such a beautiful sentiment. Yes, just it gives us strength. It does. It does. Nicole.
Well, one of the first people she's already come up here once tonight is Carrie White. I see a lot of aspects of my short fiction, just this person who has just been so bullied by everyone and so beaten down. And then when she finally gets her revenge, it's like, whoa, everybody run, you know? I just like, that's a trope I think I really love. It's something I've been drawn to over and over again. Just this or a meek, shy person who finally gets her revenge in a very memorable way. And another sort of type that I've used also in my upcoming novel even is the sort of the woman in black, the Susan Hill sort of eerie specter looming over everything, like just this kind of fearful character who's also kind of out for some kind of vengeance, or sort of a supernatural figure that's had a lot of influence in some of the things that I've written. And those are the two that really stood out to me when I was looking over that question.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Christa.
So I have to agree with Jessica that I love me a final girl. But I also love, I think I love the final girls of film, but in my fiction, I find myself drawn to and inspired by kind of the more, the quieter, a lot of the figures from Gothic horror I really enjoy. I was thinking about Sarah Crowe from Caitlin Kiernan's The Red Tree. I don't know if anyone's read that novel, but and then I was thinking about Caroline Ayers from The Little Stranger, Sarah Waters' Little Stranger, and they're both I like complex female characters who don't have all the information that they need, and they're sort of spending the novel trying to find their way with doing the best they can with the information that they have, because I feel like it mirrors real life. I mean, we all are doing the best that we can with the information that we have. And it also plays with different definitions of sanity and madness. And I like I guess maybe tortured even is a good word for it, like the just very complex, tortured female heroines of like Gothic horror novels I find really inspiring. And yeah, I probably have tried to write homages to characters like that.
Very cool. Very cool. Carina.
I have two that are my favorite. I wrote a book last year. They're all in there. The first one is the women who embrace their monstrosity. I enjoy that type of a character. For instance, it was Alyssa wasn't it Alyssa? Yeah. The Hungry Daughters of Starving Mothers. That was, I really like that kind of character. And older women, I like that when older women take their power back. I enjoy that character. And then the character also from like Ex Machina. Like there is no trying to fit in. It's I embracing that particular part of them. And I am also I'm really tired of the trope of women hating each other. It's really, I'm just done with it. And so I really love seeing when women are actually helping each other. Goodness, does that even happen? But it does. I mean, we're all in horror, so we know women help each other. But I think we need to turn those things upside down. Women have more power when they unite, when they work together, working against each other. That's something that's been imposed on us. And once we step away from that and our characters step away from that, I think we can make everything better because of that.
I love that, because I think in some ways, like that constant depiction of girls being or women being against each other kind of perpetuates the cycle in which then it's like, oh, well, that's the only, example that we have, but that doesn't have to be how it is. It's like that actually kind of is this divide and conquer thing that actually makes it harder for women to be able to get more power. So I love that.
I just took on as Cinderella, which I don't really want to write. But I'm like, so I was going to go and I started falling into the same trap. I'm like, why did the sisters have to hate each other? Right? Why does that have to happen? Why does the stepmother have to be evil? What would happen if those things were turned upside down? Right? I think we need to change that narrative. I think it's the responsibility of women to do that. And I see it happening, which makes me very happy.
Yeah. Yes. Zoje.
So I may be in a strange minority, or possibly I take the word inspired too literally, but I tend not to actually be inspired in a literal sense by fictitious characters. I don't know, it's just not where, when I'm writing or when I'm thinking about things later, I'm not thinking about characters that specifically, and I'm not sure why. It could be because I have a terrible memory, which I do. I have a terrible memory. But I did see a couple of people early on in the chat had mentioned Ripley, Sigourney Weaver's character from Aliens, and I loved her. So if I did have to say, I'm like, oh, who's the best badass woman in film, like that character, I would definitely say Ripley. For a long time, like I wanted to get a cat and named her Ripley, but then I got a cat and I didn't name her Ripley. So, oh well, I'm gonna have to get another cat.
Well, I believe it had a cat, so that's even great too. Like I love Jonesy, he was the best. All right, and Sraa.
I really like the gothic tortured mad women too. So I thought of Catherine from Wuthering Heights, and also Edna from The Awakening, which isn't horror, but I love Kate Chopin so much, and she just writes these characters that they are kind of tortured in that way by their internalized, kind of stuck in society. So I really like taking characters that kind of have that stuck feeling too, or kind of feeling a little crazy in the situations that they're in, and hopefully trying to get them out of that situation. So putting like kind of the mad tortured gothic running across the moor characters in maybe more modern settings, or actually having them, have more willpower or more independence, or just more drive to do something. I really like that combination of taking elements from the gothic literature canon and putting it into a more modern, diverse kind of setting.
I like that. I also like, because in another panel I was on with Sraa, she brought up Sylvia Plath. And I love that you brought up Sylvia Plath as being kind of horror adjacent, and Kate Chopin, because I feel the same way about both of them. Both of their work has this kind of gothic and very urgent and dire feel to it that very much does dovetail with horror. It doesn't outwardly cross over. So I love that. I love that. All right. So the next question: has diversity, so having more women in horror, just more diversity in general, has it brought any new storytelling devices or even new tropes, like new themes that maybe weren't there before? So Nicole, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, what I've noticed is like maybe some familiar stories, but just told with completely new protagonists in a different way. Like recently I finished this book called A Certain Hunger by Chelsea Summers. And it features the main character. It's told from her perspective, is this middle-aged female narrator who's lives in New York City, and she's a foodie and a gourmet, and she's also a cannibalistic serial killer. And that is the first time I think I've read a book where it was a middle-aged woman who's the killer. Usually when I read books like that, it's sort of Hannibal Lecter-ish, and the men are the killers and the women are either the victims or the detectives trying to catch the men. So it was really fascinating, and I loved the book. It was just so interesting to see that perspective, a woman being told that way. And I've also seen a lot more of books where, the witch is the sympathetic character instead of the sympathetic main character, instead of the evil one, which I also enjoy that. And so, yeah, it's sort of like it's familiar stories, but they're told from completely new perspectives and new ways. And I love it. I just really enjoyed that.
Carina.
I personally, I'm really happy to start. I'm happy that we're seeing more representation from LGBTQ. So that's something that I'm very interested in, and I'm hoping that we can bring a place that's safe so that we can have more of those stories in horror. I think that they tend to be villainized, and I'm tired of that. And in particular, bi-erasure is something that I'm looking forward to seeing more of that happening as well. So getting rid of that. So that's really where I'm at. That, and I've really been enjoying seeing that women don't have to be beautiful and young to be powerful. So that's really nice. We don't have to have the perfect tits and ass to be successful in anything that we do. We can actually be old. It's okay. We can have wrinkles. We don't have to have our hair perfect all the time, and we don't have to have our underwear match. So it's nice to start seeing women who are actually real, dealing with real things, talking about real problems, miscarriages and abortions, and having lovers. You don't have to be a virgin anymore. That's really nice, and if you get married twice or 3 times, that's actually fine. So that the diversity in the cast is something that I enjoy the most. That's what I'm really enjoying seeing happen.
I love that. Jessica.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Plus, like, the stories are just so much richer now. It feels like we're not getting the same thing over and over again, and the same characters over and over again. Like, I forgot who mentioned Twisted Anatomy, but I'm reading it to right now to give a little review / thing. But some of the stories in there, I was blown away. Like, I won't spoil anything, but I was just like, oh my God, Red story. Oh my God. I was just like, this is amazing. And only a woman could have written this this way. And I especially love things that have to do, when it goes into body horror, things that I know will make men cringe. And I know that's one story that will definitely do that. Like, I'm thinking like, there's that movie Teeth.
Mm-hmm.
About the girl who has vagina dentina or whatever. And I'm always fascinated because men hate that movie and most women like that movie. But yeah, like, I think that we approach horror from or when you bring in more diversity, you get so many more stories. You get to like look at these tropes from a different angle. Like, how would a Black final girl handle a situation? How would a disabled final girl handle a situation? How would a gay or bi final girl handle a situation? Things like that. And we get to see different stories rather than just like the same thing over and over again.
Yeah. Love that. Christa.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with everything everyone said so far. And yeah, if there is no diversity, you're just gonna get the same. I mean, we had that for a long time. You get the same stuff. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I could talk about it from a personal standpoint too. When I first started reading horror, all I read was Stephen King, and I for the longest time, it's like so embarrassing, but like I was like, oh, other authors write short stories? Like, other authors have collections of short fiction? This is so weird. I've never read any of this. And so, when I first started writing, all of my short fiction were like bad knockoff Stephen King stories. And the more you read, I mean, even I tried, you know, for the last 7 years, I feel like I've read more and more and more diverse things from all different authors and all different, you know, publishing houses, and tried to just read as diversely as possible. And you know, it's definitely affected my writing for the better, I would hope. But it's also so fun because I'm always so surprised when you see something completely new and different from a perspective that you have not experienced before. It's almost more, I mean, you know, I'm sure if Stephen King comes out with another short fiction collection and I read it, I would probably enjoy it. But it's more enjoyable to pick up like the newest issue of Nightmare. They are doing an amazing job with just the diversity and the different storytelling tropes like we're talking about, and the storytelling devices. I mean, the things that are being published in the really cutting edge markets, it's really exciting, and you read it and you're blown away not only by the story but how it was delivered. So that's really fun.
Sraa.
Yeah, I agree with all the points so far. They've been so spot on, so excellent. Too much diversity, it will never be a thing. You can't have too much diversity. So I think we'll hopefully continue to see these new perspectives and voices. And I love what Christa said about how it makes you a better writer too, because you're like, oh, there's, you know, these whole other experiences out there that you can read about and educate yourself on. And I was thinking of writers like V. Castro, who does things that nobody else writes like V. So if you've read her work, then you know. And I saw Mexican Gothic in the comments too. And that's such a great example of taking the tropes of Gothic literature, but from these different perspectives and this different setting and these viewpoints. So that was the only new thing I could think to add, but I love everybody's answers so far on that question.
And Zoje.
So to piggyback on what everybody has said, since everything's been said, you know, it isn't that the tropes themselves change with diversity. It's that for most of history, honestly, most of fiction and nonfiction has been told through the lens of white men. And when you make the lens available to everyone else, you see a completely different kaleidoscope of stories. So as everyone has said, you know, it's not that the storytelling techniques change that much, but the whole breadth of who can be a narrator changes so much, and the nuances that they can bring to their stories and the depth. And so, yeah, so it's really about, you know, storytelling should be accessible to everyone. I mean, the world has not been lived exclusively by white men. So, you know, everyone needs to be able to tell their story. And as it's been pointed out, it's like, yeah, we learn from other people's experiences. I mean, that's how ultimately we all get along on this earth, is by understanding everybody's experiences.
Wonderful, wonderful. All right, so going with that, what changes have you seen since you've become a woman in horror? So since you've been writing, or even just as a reader, maybe, you know, what changes have you seen? Let's go for changes for the better. Let's be optimistic here. Since we've only got 15 minutes, we'll start going towards optimism now. So, Sraa.
I do think indie horror in particular has made strides to be more aware of who they're putting in a table of contents, that it isn't just all white dudes. There's some really good editors and some really good allies out there that make that cognizant effort. So I do think I've seen obviously we have a ways to go. I mean, when Women in Horror Month is no longer needed, then maybe we know that we've reached the equal playing field, but we're not there yet. But again, I've seen good strides with that. There's a lot of women horror anthologies came out last year. I saw quite a few of those, and I think that's excellent. I mean, you get to introduce yourself to so many new writers. So I think those are just fun to look for. I won't say too much else, so I'll take the answers.
Carina.
I have some things I want to say about this. Horror poetry, #1, is amazing. It is opening up so many different ways to look at the world. I really love it. And I love seeing it coming in with the Science Fiction Poetry Association, that now we're seeing more and more horror, which is really great. I love that. And then I'm gonna plug the HWA. I think the scholarship program that we do is amazing. I think the young scholars is great, because young people are our future. They give us new ways of looking at the world, and they're going to be the ones who are going to take over, right? And so we need to like promote young people that this is a viable place where you can come and you can belong to. And then I think the diversity grant has just been absolutely a phenomenal ad. I know that when we were in StokerCon a couple of years ago, that there was some writing that was done about the one in Madison, about how the panels are diverse. It wasn't like, oh, we have to put one Black person on this one, or we have an Indian, we have Native American we can put here, and you know, we can put a woman here. It's just natural. I mean, HWA is pretty progressive when it comes to that, and I know that the leaders are really working to make that even more diverse, which I think is really fabulous. Yeah.
Very good. Very good. Jessica.
I think that like everyone's saying, we've had some really good changes, but also I kind of want to mention how like social media has like played a big part in that, because I feel like when Christa was talking about before how like it was mainly Stephen King, I want to say when I was younger, it was, yeah, same thing. It was Stephen King, R.L. Stine, Christopher Pike. But the reason was because that's what my library had. You know, that's what I was seeing. That was what was promoted to me. Whereas now on social media, I feel like I have such a wider breadth of people to choose from, because we have these online communities now, and our online community in horror really does try to promote diverse voices. Like I last year when my novella came out, I felt like I was very embraced by everyone, and I got to see so many other people. That's how I learned about V. That's how I learned about Haley Piper, Sonora Taylor, everyone, right? Like, and everyone. I think I just wanted to mention that. I think that that's one of the things that has aided in that change, and it's a good one.
It is. It is. So yeah.
So to tie this question back to when I wrote my first horror story, which was a screenplay, you know, and at that time, all of the people I saw who were pursuing the arts, you know, film related things and writing, were men. And certainly all of the people who I saw succeeding in those industries were men. And now, I mean, it's many, many years later, and maybe it's partly the company I choose to keep, but I just see all women now, and not just on this screen. It is very different now. And perhaps not everybody in the reading community who maybe doesn't read horror specifically, they might not know quite how much that it has changed, but it's amazing to see so many women. And again, maybe it is partly because of what I plug into. I do very much relate to books written by women. So it is what I seek out a lot, but I'm definitely so much more aware in 2021 than I was in 1990 of just how many creative women are out there who are doing their thing and who are now becoming successful at it. So it's amazing to see that.
Yeah. Christa?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people everyone said really great things, and I won't repeat all of that, but I think one of the things that I've noticed is that there's not just like this push for diversity, like Carina said. It's not just like, oh, let's, you know, throw one person from one group on this panel and then we're done with it. It's the thing that I've noticed that's steadily increased over the, you know, 7 years that I've been in the indie horror community, is that people seem to genuinely want to have conversations to truly learn how to make things better. It seems like maybe in the beginning, some people thought that they could get away with just slapping a Band-Aid on their lack of diversity problem, but it didn't stick. Oh, that Band-Aid metaphor worked all the way through. It's that people, it's like if, and I think you can look at it from the other way, where if people fail in that regard, like if a publishing house puts out a table of contents and they don't realize that the entire thing is, older white men that have been publishing horror forever, and Jessica bringing in social media in a little bit of a different sense, I think the community at large has been holding the gatekeepers accountable to not just slapping that Band-Aid on. Like there has to be a conversation. Everybody wants to kind of make it truly better for everyone, make it actually inclusive, not just, oh, let's get away with, putting out one decent table of contents and then go back to what we were doing before. It seems like there's been a real desire on basically everything that I've seen, and the people in the places that don't want to change usually get kind of pushed to the side at this point, where before it was probably the opposite. So I think that's great.
Yeah. And Nicole.
Yeah, everybody else has already had great answers for this, but I have to agree. Just when I was first starting out thinking about the idea of writing a novel, it's just that there was a small press scene, but it has just exploded like in the last decade or so. It's amazing. There is just so many more options for somebody to both pursue publication and also find things to read, and by much more diverse authors, and also, in my mind, a lot more interesting horror, because people take chances that I think bigger markets wouldn't necessarily take a chance on. And it's such an exciting time to be reading horror and writing horror. I think there's so many options, and it's just great. And my to be read pile is probably big enough to follow me and kill me, but I'm fine with that. I just love it.
Yeah.
I love that. That's great. All right. And our last question, which is kind of similar to the one we just had, but got anything else to add? What do you hope for the future of the horror genre? So Jessica, let's start with you.
One thing I do want to say, I was not trying to throw libraries under the bus. I do see like a huge shift that's happening now with everything. It's not like how it was when I was like in elementary school or middle school. But things that I see that are happening, or things that I want to happen, was that the question?
Yes, what do you hope for the future of the horror genre? Yeah.
I want this to keep going. I want more diverse voices. I want more. That's what I want. I want to see us all be, I want audiences to know that they can see themselves in these stories. Okay. You don't have to just see one type of person. You can see yourself no matter who you are. And that's why I think it's so important to have more people writing, different people writing. And not only that, but then also have publications pick them up, to have more people promote them and stuff like that. So I just want to see this I just want this to continue, and I want it to grow, that's basically it.
I love that. That's beautiful. That's wonderful. Zoje.
Yeah, I have a pretty specific hope for the future of horror, and specifically for the future of women in horror. And this relates back again to, my early career in film. And I was so aware in my early years in film that there are certain words that were never applied to women. Like there were no artistic geniuses. Women weren't geniuses. Women weren't iconoclasts. Things like that. And so my future hope for women in horror is that when you hear the word master of horror, that the first thing somebody thinks of is a specific woman, or that when you think of horror geniuses, that people automatically have women writers that they immediately put in that category. So that's my hope.
Yes. Another word that I always get upset about is visionary. Every person I've ever heard be called a visionary is a man, and I get real mad about it. Now it's to the point that I hear that word about somebody and I'm like, yeah, it's a man, isn't it? So yes, I love that. I love that. Christa.
I mean, how do I follow that? That's like perfect. I want that too. But yeah, I guess I'll say, so this genre is sort of built on the certainty that the world is full of horrific things, and the horrific things they're certainly not going anywhere. And if anything, I know we were trying to go for optimism, Gwendolyn, I apologize.
It's okay. No, it's okay.
I feel like, things have the potential to get worse. I mean, we have this ongoing pandemic, political climate, the, state of our earth. We have the potential for a lot more horror to come, real life horror. And I feel like, I think one of the underlying things that we've all been saying throughout this panel, and maybe not stating explicitly, is, a lot of women and people in general use horror to deal with their own fears. And I think some of the best horror is people, writers, working out what they're most afraid of and how to deal with that, whether it's, like we said, individual horror or what we can do as a society. So yeah, I want horror writers to just keep rising to the occasion, to shine a light on how we can get through and how we can keep fighting the monster and come out hopefully the other side. So that's my hope.
See, that's still a positive way to end it. That's still a positive ending.
Put it up right at the end.
Yeah, there we go. Carina.
I have something to say about this. This is what I want to happen. I want people to realize that horror is not just slasher films or Stephen King. I get really tired of genre being put in a box. I'm getting old. I'm tired of being put in a box. So people are like, oh, fantasy, it's like magical realism to epic fantasy. And oh, there's space. Science fiction is such a broad, horror. I'm like, oh, come on. Are you kidding me? I'm so tired of that. There are so many different kinds of horror. It's not one size fits all. So Maria Davina Haley, she wrote Beowulf. This is a horror story. This is horror, like epic poem. There was a school in Loveland that a teacher wanted, her wish list was to have enough books of Beowulf to teach it to her students in this high school in Loveland. And Maria put it out there. I bought one. A lot of people bought one. The school now has 250 copies of Beowulf that were all bought, like Jessica was saying, on social media. They were all sent on Amazon, and every single freshman in that school is going to read Beowulf. That's how we change it, right? That's how we start saying, listen, it's bigger. It's not what you think it is. It's more. And if we work together, we can even put it out there, right? We can educate people, and then it will open up all these other doors that we can then walk through.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, love that. Nicole.
Great answers. Yeah. I have a couple different ideas for that. First of all, I would love to see the genre just sort of be seen as more marketable again, because a lot of people just love horror, but I'll go to a submission for a general agency or something, and there's not even really a little thing in the drop down for horror. It's like, really? I would really like to see it be seen as more viable again and more popular, so more people get to tell their stories to wider audiences. And on a much more personal level, I would love to see more stories featuring like middle-aged women as a protagonist. It's just, I need to write that too, because a lot of stories I write still focus on younger people, and that would be my personal change. I would love to see more stories from perspective of, I guess, people like me. So it goes back to the whole issue of like seeing ourselves reflected in our stories. And those are my two ideas for that.
Very good. Very good. And Sraa.
Sorry, I had to mute myself because my neighbors are blasting some smooth jazz. So if you hear that, I'm sorry. I don't know what's happening on this romantic Valentine's weekend with the smooth jazz. Anyway, it's fun to live in an apartment, folks. I definitely agree with everyone's answers. One thing I would add that I really hope to see, especially in horror, but across publishing, not only more diverse stories, but more diverse editors and agents and publishers. Because if we have the same people choosing what gets published and that never changes, then we're always going to have those same obstacles, that same gatekeeping. So that has to change too, because the white man doesn't always understand the perspective of a Black woman's story or a queer person's story. And it could be something so great. So I really hate that absolute bullshit argument where people were like, oh, I just chose the best stories. But how do you know what's best if you're conditioned by just Stephen King and if you're a white guy that doesn't read outside of that perspective? So that's definitely probably the biggest thing that I hope to see going forward.
All great answers. This is fantastic. We are at 9 o'clock, but if anybody has a question, we may be able to quickly answer it. So if you guys have anything for us that you're just dying to know from these amazing women in horror. I actually haven't seen any. I've been watching. Oh, there is one. Nicole, you are on Twitter, correct? Somebody just asked
yes.
if you're on Twitter. Yes. So that's. Do you want to give your handle?
Yeah, I'll type
You're
it
like,
into the
no.
box. It sounds a little.
Okay.
Back when I came up with that, I was not thinking about like using your actual name so people can find you. So it's in some Nicole. Sorry about that.
All right. No, nobody's got questions for us. We have just covered everything, ladies. So we've just covered everything. It was so great. So, and it was great. It was so wonderful talking with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. And yeah, and thank you everybody for coming. Oh wait, there is one. YA horror you enjoy. Does anybody have any YA horror that they would put on there? On a list of things that they like?
I can take that one. I love Shay Earnshaw's work, like The Wicked Deep, very beautiful and evocative. I think that's YA horror, what kind of YA horror? So that's an author I really admire in that genre.
Very cool.
I know we already mentioned R.L. Stine, but I've been rereading the Fear Street novels. These ones are like a little bit, they're for the older crowd, not like middle grade for Goosebumps, but Fear Street's more like for teens. And like this one's a super chiller one. So I don't know. That's always been one of my favorites.
The Cake Spell by Gabby Triana too. It's one of my favorites.
Ooh. Yeah, Gabby just had a new book come out this week, I think, Moonchild.
Yeah,
so,
I shipped it to myself. It's coming. I'm very excited.
All right. So thank you everybody for coming, and it was a very lively chat. I was trying to catch it as it was going by, and yeah, thank you all. So yeah, happy Women in Horror Month, everybody. Yes.
And thank you, Gwendolyn, for your excellent moderating.
Oh, thank you. And thank you to HWA and Becky Spratford for putting this together. This was wonderful, a wonderful way to spend a Friday night. Since we can't go out and socialize, we socialized here. So
thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.